It was a Tuesday, raining, the kind of rain that soaks into your bones and refuses to leave. I was sitting on a cracked plastic chair in a crowded laundromat splitting a cup of instant noodles with my 8-year-old daughter Mia. It wasn't a glamorous moment, but it was honest. It was hours. Then my phone buzzed against the table. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. A notification from Facebook. My sister Alyssa had tagged me in a photo. I opened it and the air left my lungs. It was a picture of me right then and there. Taken through the glass window. I looked exhausted, poor and defeated. The caption read, "Some people are just born to be burdens, sad." End quote. I stared at the screen, waiting for the shock to register. But before I could even process the cruelty, a second notification popped up. My mother had hearted the post. "Before we dive into this mess, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Right now, I'd love to know who's standing in my corner." Tonight, the air in the laundromat seemed to vanish, sucked out by the vacuum of my own humiliation. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen, waiting for the inevitable sting of tears. Beside me, Zachary shifted in his plastic chair. We had been separated for 6 months, existing in a polite, cold standoff. I expected him to look away. I expected him to offer that tight, pained grimace. He always used, when my family made a scene or worse to tell me, to just ignore it, to be the bigger person to keep the peace, but he didn't look away. He leaned in, his eyes scanning the photo of me and Mia, then the caption, then my mother's heart reaction. He didn't sigh. He didn't offer a platitude. He didn't even blink. He just reached into the pocket of his work coat and pulled out his own phone. For months I had misinterpreted his distance. I thought he was checking out that my family's endless drama was a tax he was no longer willing to pay. I thought his silence was weakness, a sign that he was too passive to defend me, but looking at his profile in the harsh, flickering fluorescent light, I realized I had it all wrong. Zachary wasn't absent. He was a sniper lying in the tall grass. He hadn't been ignoring their cruelty. He had been auditing it. He had been watching every insult, every theft, every smirk, not with indifference but with the cold calculation of a man gathering ammunition. He wasn't waiting for them to stop. He was waiting for them to cross a line they couldn't walk. He knew that in a war against narcissists you don't fire warning shots. You wait until they expose their throat and then you end it. His movements were steady, precise, the hands of a carpenter who measures twice and cuts once. He navigated to his gallery, to a hidden folder I didn't know existed. He selected a single image. He didn't type a rant. He didn't tag anyone. He didn't add a caption to explain or justify. He simply hit post. My phone pinged. Then it pinged again. Then it began to vibrate continuously against the metal table, a swarm of digital notifications coming to life. I looked down, refreshing my feed. There it was, posted 30 seconds ago by Zachary. It was a photo of Alyssa, but she wasn't posing with her luxury car or her perfect husband. She was standing outside the Galaxy Motel, the cheap one on the edge of town with the flickering neon sign. She was wrapped in an embrace, her face clearly visible, her lips pressed against the mouth of a man who was definitely not her husband. It was the town's beloved youth pastor, the man who had baptized her niece, the man who led the morals committee my parents chaired. The internet reacted instantly. It wasn't a ripple, it was a tidal wave. The comments on Alyssa's post about me stopped. The likes froze. The attention shifted violently from my poverty to her hypocrisy. In the quiet of the laundromat, the only sound was the hum of the dryers and the relentless buzzing of my phone, signaling the destruction of my sister's golden reputation. Zachary put his phone back in his pocket, picked up his fork and went back to his noodles. He had just burned their entire kingdom to the ground without saying a word. While the digital world ignited, I sat in the humid quiet of the laundromat and stared at the noodles cooling in my cup. The smell of cheap chicken seasoning filled my nose, a scent that usually meant comfort, but tonight it just smelled like poverty. $750. That was the number echoing in my head. That was the amount Alyssa had taken from my emergency fund 2 weeks ago. $750 I had scraped together dollar by dollar, intended for a washer repair in Mia's dance classes. She had called me crying, saying she needed a car detail for a networking event, claiming it was an investment in her future. When I asked for it back, my parents had descended on me like vultures. They called me selfish. They said I was jealous of Alyssa's shine. They said family helps family, no questions asked. I looked at Mia happily slurping a noodle, oblivious to the war being waged on my phone. This wasn't just about money, it never was, it was about the architecture of our family. Alyssa was the golden child, the sun around which we were all expected to orbit. Her needs were emergencies. My needs were inconveniences. Her mistakes were learning opportunities. My struggles were character flaws. For 29 years I had been the designated failure, the shadow necessary to make her light seem brighter. They needed me to be down so she could be up. If I succeeded, if I was happy, their entire hierarchy would collapse. My poverty wasn't a tragedy to them, it was a requirement. It was the fuel that kept their egos running. And now, sitting in a laundromat because I couldn't afford to fix my own machine, watching my mother heart a post, mocking my struggle, I realized the truth. They didn't just want me to fail, they enjoyed it. It validated them. But looking at Zachary calmly eating his dinner after nuking their reputation, I felt a shift. The shame was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard anger. They had built their glass house on my back, and Zachary had just thrown the first stone. The fallout wasn't a ripple, it was a nuclear detonation. By the time we got back to my apartment, the town's grapevine had already strangled Alyssa's reputation. The youth pastor was fired before midnight. An emergency board meeting convened over Zoom while the photo was still trending locally. My phone was a brick of constant vibration. Glowing with the heat of 1,000 notifications I refused to read, I thought the shame would stop them. I thought the sheer weight of their public exposure would force them into hiding, or at least into a stunned silence. I was wrong. Narcissists don't feel shame when they're exposed. They feel rage. They don't retreat. They attack the witness. It started with the headlights. High beams cutting through the rain, sweeping across my living room wall like searchlights. I looked out the window. It looked like a funeral procession for the wealthy. My father's sedan, my mother's SUV, and Alyssa's brand new luxury coupe all idling in the parking lot of my complex. They didn't park in the visitor spots. They pulled right up to the curb, blocking the walkway, engines, running wipers thrashing against the downpour. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was my sanctuary. My ground floor apartment, the one I paid for with overtime shifts and freelance gigs, was supposed to be safe. Now it was under siege. They didn't knock, they swarmed. My mother was first, her face twisted into a mask of fury I had never seen directed at anyone but me. She pounded on the glass of my living room window, the sound reverberating through the thin walls. She was screaming, her mouth moving in jagged shapes, words muffled by the glass but the intent clear. Ungrateful, ruined, how dare you? Then came Melissa. She wasn't crying, she was a hurricane. She marched up the concrete path, her expensive heels clicking sharply. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking for something to destroy. She needed a target for the humiliation burning her skin. On my small porch there was a single decoration, a terracotta flower pot painted with lopsided sunflowers and bright blue clouds. Mia had made it for me for Mother's Day. It was filled with cheap potting soil and a few struggling marigolds I was trying to keep alive. It was the only beautiful thing I owned that hadn't been touched by their judgment. Alyssa didn't hesitate, she didn't stumble. She looked right at me through the window, locked eyes, and kicked it. The sound of the clay shattering was louder than the rain. It was a wet, crunching noise that felt like a bone breaking. Soil spilled across the wet concrete, burying the crushed orange flowers in mud. She stomped on the shards, grinding the painted sunflowers into dust. It wasn't just a pot, it was a message. Nothing you build is safe, nothing you love is yours. The banging on the door started then, a rhythmic, violent thudding that shook the frame. My father was shouting now, demanding I open up, demanding I fix what I had broken, but I hadn't broken anything. I had just turned on the light and they hated what they saw. I backed away from the window, pulling Mia behind me, feeling the cold realization settle in my gut. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a home invasion. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. 911. It was the only option left. My family was screaming, banging on the door, destroying my property. But before I could press the button, a hand gently covered mine. No police, Zachary said. His voice was low, calm, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Just me. He moved past me, not rushing, just walking with a deliberate, terrifying purpose. He unlocked the deadbolt. The click sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, pulling it shut behind him until it clicked. Sealing Mia and me inside, I watched through the peephole. Zachary stood there, hands loose at his sides, facing down 3 screaming people. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't puff out his chest. He just stood there, a solid wall of muscle and resolve. The porch light cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the set of his jaw. My father was the first to falter. He stopped mid-shout, his eyes darting from Zachary's face to the closed door. My mother continued to yell for a few seconds longer, her shrill accusations bouncing off Zachary's chest like pebbles off a tank, until she realized she was the only one making noise. Alyssa stood behind them, her face contorted in a mask of ugly entitlement, but even she seemed to shrink under Zachary's unwavering gaze. "You're trespassing," Zachary said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rain like a knife. "We need to talk to Taylor," my mother shrieked, trying to push past him. Zachary didn't move an inch. He simply blocked her path, not touching her, just existing in the space she wanted to occupy. Taylor isn't speaking to you, he said, and neither am I, but I am going to tell you something. I have the time-stamped messages where you knew about Alyssa's affair 3 weeks ago and discussed how to keep it quiet so she could still lead the church fundraiser. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's mouth snapped shut. My father turned a sickly shade of grey. They stared at him, realizing for the first time that their quiet carpenter son-in-law held the keys to their entire social existence. I haven't posted those yet, Zachary continued, his voice devoid of emotion. But if you take one more step toward this door, if you shout one more word at my wife, I will. And then everyone will know that the moral pillars of the community covered up adultery to save face. He paused, letting the weight of the threat settle on them like a heavy blanket. Go home while you still have one. Your unc's sick, Alyssa screamed, her voice cracking into a high, jagged sound that hurt my ears. She pushed past our mother, practically throwing herself against the invisible barrier Zachary had created. Her face was streaked with rain and mascara, her eyes wild with the panic of a trapped animal. You followed me. You stalked me to a motel. You're a creep, Zachary, a jealous, obsession-filled creep. My mother latched on to this new narrative instantly. It was a lifeline. If Zachary was the villain, then Alyssa could still be the victim. That's right, my mother hissed, stepping up beside her golden child, invading her privacy, following her. That's illegal. We could have you arrested for harassment. You think a judge is going to look kindly on a man who stalks his sister-in-law? I watched from the hallway, my hand clutching Mia's shoulder. For a second, I was terrified. They were so good at this, twisting reality until the person holding the mirror was blamed for the reflection. They were going to spin this. They were going to make Zachary the predator and Alyssa the prey. Zachary didn't flinch, he didn't defend himself, he didn't argue, he just reached into his pocket again and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once, then turned it around so they could see. I didn't take the photo, he said. His voice was flat, bored even. Then who did? Alyssa demanded, her chest heaving. Who did you hire? Who are you paying to ruin my life? I didn't hire anyone, Zachary said. I didn't have to. The photo was sent to me yesterday along with the time-stamped location data and a very polite request to wait until tonight to post it. He looked directly at my father, who was standing frozen near the cars, sensing the shift in the air. You want to know who sent it? You want to know who hates the lie? You people live more than I do. Zachary paused, letting the rain fill the silence. Then he dropped the name that shattered the world, Alexander. Alyssa stopped breathing. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Alexander, Alyssa's husband, the wealthy, successful, perfect son-in-law they bragged about at every church picnic. The man whose bank account was their retirement plan. You're lying, Alyssa whispered, but the color had drained from her face. He's known for 6 weeks, Zachary said, his words hitting them like stones. He knew about the youth pastor, he knew about the late nights at the office. But he has a prenup, Alyssa, a strict one. He needed cause, he needed public undeniable proof of infidelity to trigger the fault clause so he could divorce you without losing half his assets. Zachary took a step forward and the family took a step back. He couldn't post it himself, it would look petty. It might hurt his standing at the firm, so he sent it to the one person he knew had nothing left to lose, and honestly I was happy to help. The realization washed over them. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a tactical eviction. Alexander, the man they worshipped, hadn't just left Alyssa. He had orchestrated her destruction from the shadows. He had fed her to the wolves to keep his hands clean. Check your email, Zachary told Alyssa, his voice devoid of pity. He told me he was serving the papers electronically at 8:00. You're not just exposed, Alyssa, you're broke. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a guillotine blade that had already fallen, with the crowd just waiting for the head to drop. Alyssa stared at her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen, desperate to find a lie that could fix this, but there was no fixing it. The notification she had received was real, the divorce filing was real, the freezing of their joint assets was real. I watched my parents' faces as the truth settled in. It wasn't concern for their daughter's heartbreak, it was panic for their own wallets. Alexander wasn't just a son-in-law, he was their retirement plan. He was the reason they could lease cars they couldn't afford and brag about vacations they didn't pay for. The Bank of Alexander had just closed its doors forever, and they were standing in the rain with nothing but a wet, cheating daughter and a ruined reputation. My mother's eyes snapped toward me. It was a reflex when the world breaks. Blame the scapegoat. You, she spat, pointing a shaking finger past Zachary's shoulder at me. You did this. You let this happen. If you hadn't been so jealous, if you hadn't provoked him, none of this would be happening. You ruined this family. It was such a delusional pivot that I almost laughed. Even now, standing in the wreckage of their own making, they needed it to be my fault. They needed me to be the villain so they could remain the victims. Zachary didn't let her finish. He took one step forward, just one, but it was enough. It invaded their personal space, a violation of the invisible barrier they thought protected them. My father flinched. Alyssa stumbled back, nearly tripping over her own heels. Wrong, Zachary said. His voice was no longer just calm, it was final. It sounded like a judge reading a death sentence. You ruined it. You built a life on lies and used Taylor as the foundation to hold it up. Well, the foundation just walked away. He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering on my mother. You are trespassing, you are harassing my wife, you are destroying private property. He gestured to the shattered flower pot, the mud streaking the concrete. If you are not in your cars in 10 seconds, I will release the rest of the file and I will press charges for the damage. My father opened his mouth to argue, to bluster, to use the same old intimidation tactics that had worked since I was a child. But then he looked up. He saw the porch lights flickering on in the apartments around us. He saw the neighbors standing in their windows, phones raised, recording the wealthy family having a meltdown in the rain. He realized the audience wasn't just me anymore. It was everyone. The shame hit them harder than the rain. Let's go, my father muttered, grabbing my mother's arm. But my house, Alyssa wailed, her voice thin and broken. He changed the locks. I can't go home. Get in the car, Alyssa, my father snapped. They retreated. It wasn't a dignified exit, it was a scramble. They splashed through puddles, heads ducked against the rain and the camera phones dragging their humiliation with them. They climbed into their luxury cars, soaked and defeated, and peeled out of the parking lot. Zachary stayed on the porch until the last set of tail lights disappeared around the corner. He didn't cheer. He didn't celebrate, he just let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders dropping an inch as the adrenaline faded. The monster wasn't under the bed anymore. We had turned on the lights and it had scurred away. Zachary stepped back inside the door, clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. He locked the deadbolt, then engaged the chain. He didn't say a word. He just leaned his forehead against the wood for a moment, his breathing heavy, his shirt soaked through with rain. The adrenaline was leaving him now, and I saw a slight tremor in his hands, the physical cost of being a wall for someone else. He turned around, wiping water from his eyes. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the utility closet, grabbed a dustpan and went back to the broken flower pot lying on the entryway floor. Leave it, I said softly. No, he said, it's not trash, it's just broken. He gathered the shards, carefully treating the cheap terracotta like it was porcelain. He carried them to the kitchen table, then went to his toolbox. He came back with a tube of epoxy and a small vial of gold pigment powder he used for antique furniture restoration. I watched mesmerized as he sat down and began to work. He mixed the gold into the glue. He picked up 2 jagged pieces of the pot, the ones with Mia's lopsided sunflower, and fitted them together. He applied the gold-laced adhesive along the fracture. Their unkes, a Japanese art form called kinyugi, he said, his voice rough but steady. They fix broken pottery with gold. They believe that the piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken, that its history makes it stronger. He looked up at me, then his eyes searching mine. That's us, Taylor. They broke us, but we don't have to throw it away. We can put it back together with gold. We can make the scars the strongest part of us. I looked at the pot. A bright vein of gold ran through the painted clouds. I stood up and walked to the counter where a manila envelope had been sitting for weeks. The divorce papers. I didn't hesitate. I picked them up and walked to the shredder in the corner of the room. The machine worded to life a mechanical gnashing that sounded like music. I fed the pages in the custody arrangement, the division of assets, the dissolution of our partnership. They turned into confetti in seconds. I don't want a refund, I said, my voice thick with tears. I want the repair. Zachary stood up and pulled me into his arms. He smelled like rain and sawdust and safety. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. I felt like I was home. We sat back down at the table. My phone was on the surface screen, dark. I picked it up one last time. I went to my contacts. Mom, Dad, Alyssa. I didn't send a final message. I didn't offer an explanation. I just hit block, block, block. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. It was heavy with peace. Mia climbed onto Zachary's lap and he wrapped his arm around her, his other hand holding mine. We pulled the cups of instant noodles back toward us. They were cold now. The broth congealed the noodles soggy. But as we ate in the quiet safety of our ground floor apartment with the gold flower pot drying on the table between us, I knew I had never tasted anything better. The glass house was gone. We were building something solid in its place. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to save your own peace, share this story. You never know who needs permission to walk away today. If you enjoyed the story, hit like and subscribe for more story. Share this story. You are not alone. God bless you. Thanks for watching.